Is the United States unprepared for a modern conflict? Well, the Wall Street Journal sure as heck seems to think so. They had an article titled, NATO has seen the future and is unprepared. Here's the basics. It's May of 2025. There's this joint exercise called Exercise Hedgehog 25, and a team of 10 Ukrainians working with drones destroyed 17 NATO armored vehicles and conducted 30 strikes on other NATO targets. So is that bad? Yes, but also no. So, you think this was clickbait? This is a Ryan Macbeth video, baby. I got nuance for days.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
And I'll have the link to the Wall Street Journal article available at ryanmacbeth.substack.com, although it might be paywalled at the Wall Street Journal site. I'll also have some articles on masking and running command posts in the drone environment that were written by drone expert John Antal, who helped proofread this video. So let's kind of break this down, the good, the bad, and what I really fear. So stay tuned till the end.
Skip to the end.
So the message verbatim from the Wall Street Journal is, Russia and Ukraine have shown the world the future of warfare, and America and its allies aren't ready for it. And that's kind of true, and kind of not. You know, there's this saying that we're always fighting the last war, and that's kind of true sometimes. In reality, you don't always get to fight the war you want to fight. You know, back in 1921, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the Secretary of the Navy, and he said, "The day of the battleship has not passed, and it is highly unlikely that an airplane or fleet of them would ever be successful attacking a fleet of Navy vessels under battle conditions." I'm a smoker, but I recognize that I smoke too much. My biggest issue is when I write scripts, I sit down, I usually have a cigar in my mouth, and I'm just there for hours smoking and writing. It's not sustainable. Cravings aren't just about nicotine, it's about habit. I associate writing with smoking. So when Fume reached out to me, I gave him a shot. This is a flavored air device. There's no batteries, no nicotine, no vapor. It gives you something to do with your hands, a little bit of flavor when you inhale. My personal favorite is this maple pepper flavor because it's very similar to a cigar I like. I tend to smoke these short, thin Lanceros when I'm writing, and I can just kind of keep this in my mouth. It's almost like a Lancero. There's other flavors if you're into that kind of thing, and they're not overpowering. It's almost like flavored water. Go to Try Fume right now and you grab a Journey Pack, you'll get a free Fume topper. That's the soft part right here, just for using my code Ryan Macbeth. And it kind of simulates the butt of a cigarette or the butt of a cigar that you can kind of chew on. So head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code Ryan Macbeth. You'll get a free Fume topper with your Journey Pack. Now, by 1941, the vulnerability of battleships to air attack was proven by the Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor while Roosevelt was in office. Of course, that was 20 years later. Technology improves significantly in this case. So I think we're not always fighting the last war. It's more like the Pentagon, the modern day Pentagon, essentially has to make a bet on the future with a limited amount of information. Now, sometimes you predict the future and the bet pays off. General Eric Shinseki envisioned this lighter, faster army. And I have a whole video about him. And unfortunately, his reputation will always be, he's the guy that issued the Black Beret to all the troops. But he's also the guy that envisioned the Intra-Brigade Combat Team, or IBTC. And he's the guy who thought that future U.S. combat was going to look more like Bosnia and Serbia. So what we needed were these light brigade combat teams that could deploy with all the stuff they needed at the brigade level and could be kind of snapped in and snapped out like Lego. And in this case, General Shinseki bet right. When the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan came along, many units deployed as brigades. And the Stryker, which was envisioned by General Shinseki as this interim armored vehicle, turned out to be a highly survivable vehicle, which proved itself in both Iraq and later on in Ukraine. You know, sometimes you do bet wrong.
I also like to live dangerously.
And that's kind of the story of the Littoral Combat Ship, or the LCS. The original idea behind the LCS was this small, lightly manned ship with a low draft that could operate off the coast, or littorals. Since 40% of the world's population lives within 100 miles of some sort of coastline, and wars are usually fought near where people live, it kind of makes sense to have something that can sit off the coast and provide some sort of naval gunnery support or maybe drone support.
I suggest you hit, sir.
And wars, especially the kind of low-intensity conflict that the U.S. predicted would be fought in the future, are going to be fought where people live. Now, if you look at that whole Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia, for example, the situation would have been a lot different if you had two littoral combat ships off the coast providing naval gunnery, which was kind of the idea behind the ship. The problem today with the littoral combat ship was the advent of small, cheap drones that could be launched from land. So the littoral combat ship could no longer safely littoral. And since it was so lightly armed, it couldn't really combat either, at least in a LSCO or large-scale combat operations environment against an adversary like China.
20 beats your 5. I'm sorry, sir.
Nowadays, the LCS has a lot of improvements, especially with the advent of containerized missiles, which kind of give it some punch, and the Fire Scout UAV. But the U.S. has kind of bet that future wars would look more like Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and when you bet right, you get the Striker. When you bet wrong, you get the LCS. And unfortunately, nobody has a crystal ball here. So the real question is this: are future conflicts going to look like Ukraine? Yes, but also no. Now, one of the big problems with Ukraine and Russia is that neither side can kind of gain air superiority over the other. It's not that air defense is that good, although it is pretty good these days. It's moreover that Ukraine's air force wasn't large enough to stop the Russians, and Russia's air force they didn't know how to do deconfliction with their surface-to-air missile units. So you had Ukraine, which couldn't sortie enough aircraft to fight, and you had Russia, who was afraid to sortie aircraft, at least over Ukraine, because they were afraid they were going to shoot their own jets down. There are only two countries in the world that have dedicated SEAD aircraft for suppression of enemy air defenses: the United States and China. The U.S. with its F-16C and D, as well as the Navy EF-18 Growler, and China has the J-16D. Now, when the U.S. went to capture Nicolas Maduro during Operation Absolute Resolve, we used SEAD aircraft to take out surface-to-air missile sites, and then we could just kind of do whatever we wanted in the air. And I guarantee you that we had aircraft performing combat air patrol to shoot down any Venezuelan aircraft that tried to intercept. Once you establish air superiority, it's over at the strategic level. Look, Iran, during the 12-day war, there were Israeli drones that were like flying over the capital with absolute impunity. Iran couldn't do anything about it. Now, granted, there were also some Israeli ground commando units involved with that operation, and they were actually using small drones against Iranian command and control targets. But the point here is that once you establish air superiority, it becomes a lot harder to get stuff to the front because we interdict it and we blow it up. Look at the highway of death from Operation Desert Storm. That is all you need to know about American air superiority. The adversary might be able to launch a few drones at the tactical level, even with U.S. air superiority, but you're going to do it hungry and without gas for your generator. Now, granted, you can have strategic and operational air superiority, but the adversary can still have air superiority in the tactical fight when it comes to drones. Good example of this is the fight against ISIS in Mosul. This was Iraq back in 2016. That was a COIN or counterinsurgency fight where you had supply caches all over the place, and ISIS could fly these drones kind of with impunity, then go to another house, reach into the cache, take out the drone. They had the support of the local population. But in a LSCO or large-scale combat operation, we are just collapsing the entire logistics ecosystem. That doesn't mean that the adversary soldiers won't be able to get a couple of drones off, but the mass of drones that we're seeing in Ukraine is likely to be a lot less than what we're seeing in Ukraine. And I'll tell you this, I don't care how loyal you are to a regime in power, Russian soldier, Chinese soldier, a soldier is like 6 meals away from being a bandit. One of the reasons that Assad's army collapsed so fast was that soldiers hadn't heard from their leadership in days. They weren't getting fed, they weren't getting supplied, they weren't getting paid. And if you have a gun and you haven't eaten in a few days, pretty soon you're going to find some food, even if that means leaving your post to do so. Now, once the U.S. establishes air superiority, we move. Operation Desert Storm took about 6 weeks of airstrikes under a plan called Airland Battle 2000. Today, we have a different system called JADO, or Joint All-Domain Operations, where we just start everything at once. Air, land, space, cyber. Instead of a hurricane followed by a tidal wave like in Desert Storm, we give the adversary 1,000 tornadoes to deal with at once. If you want to learn more about JADO, read my novel Lies to Roll Men. It's available on Amazon or Audible if you're a Marine. Now, one of those components of JADO is maneuver. And this was recognized in this exercise where the Wall Street Journal says Hedgehog 2025 envisioned a battlefield where tanks and troops still have some ability to move. And the reason that the Russo-Ukraine war got kind of locked into this 1917 style meat grinder is that Russia just couldn't maneuver against modern anti-tank systems with modern surveillance drones, some of which could also drop munitions. So wait, Ryan, you're saying that drones do make a difference? Yes, but also no. Drones absolutely make a difference on the side of Ukraine, at least at that point. But one of the reasons was that Ukraine was kind of forced to use drones. Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. And God, Jesus, this war has been going on for 4 years. The Bengals and the Rams were in the Super Bowl back then, and we don't talk about Bruno was number 1 on the Hot 100.
We don't talk about Bruno.
By June of 2022, Ukraine was firing 5,000 to 6,000 rounds of artillery a day. They were essentially out of ammunition. Ukraine really didn't produce any artillery ammunition at the start of the war, so they were dipping into their reserve stocks, and it takes a lot to stand up a plant. Now, eventually they got production going, but in the interim, they turned to drones because they had to. And since drones were so effective on the Ukrainian side, Russia started using them as well. But my big fear here is that we're going to take the wrong lessons away from Ukraine. Look, first-person view drones all over the battlefield in Ukraine are a common thing. I mean, listen to this.
Я не чую.
Can you imagine the abject terror of hearing those first-person drones and knowing that there's a person behind that thing hunting you? I mean, yeah, I drove Road Irish in Iraq, but roadside bombs are never personal. They were more of a to whom it may concern kind of thing. But even though these weapons are effective, does that mean we should give every American soldier a first-person view drone? I mean, I don't think so. I think they certainly have their place. I mean, we're working on this new rifle right now called the M7. Kind of the idea behind it is that it can defeat body armor through barrier material out to like 800 meters. Cool!
All right, everyone, chill.
I mean, but that's kind of probably why you send a drone out there and drop an explosive on them. You know, like instead of fielding a new rifle for those conditions where you're going out 800 meters, maybe just drop a drone on the guy. Like that is definitely a use case for a drone, and you don't need a whole new rifle in order to do that. And you know, seeing over the next hill with the Black Hornet Nano is an excellent use case for drones. Does that mean we need the same capabilities as Ukraine? I don't think so, because we already have artillery and mortars and most likely complete control of the sky. Counter-drone tech such as electronic warfare, anti-drone, drones, and kinetic weapons are definitely needed. Also note that we're never going to fight exactly like the Ukrainians, but we need to take the lessons learned from Ukraine and apply them in a few key areas. And that's where NATO had a problem against the Ukrainians. The Wall Street Journal reported that NATO failed to account for how drones have made the battlefield more transparent. NATO battle group was just walking around, not using any kind of disguise, parking tents and armored vehicles. We called one participant who played an enemy role. It was all destroyed. That is definitely a lesson to learn. The days of the Taj Mahal command post are over. Back during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had these massive command centers. Now, yeah, at the strategic level. This picture of an artillery battalion's tactical operations center was taken on May 19th, 2025. This is going to get targeted and destroyed. Full stop. And how long does this tent thing take to set up and break down? You got radio antennas sticking right out of the top of this thing. I mean, ideally, you should run those radio antennas like 100 meters away. I mean, don't put the antenna right where you are. And what's the thermal profile of this thing? You know, are generators running in it? Is it a big heat blob showing up on thermals? You know, we tend to think in the visual spectrum. And we take a tank and we cover it with branches and we go, yeah, looks good. But switch on the thermals and we see something different. And God knows what we're putting out on the radio spectrum or what some guy is putting out on Facebook. I mean, look, the Ryan Macbeth Survivability Onion here, and you can download this at ryanmacbeth.substack.com along with a whole slideshow I did on this. I didn't invent the Survivability Onion, but I think I popularized it here.
You know, not everybody like onions.
Number one in the Survivability Onion is don't be there. Always be mobile. Don't be where the enemy thinks you're at. And if you are there, don't be seen. We need to mask in the full spectrum. Not just the visual spectrum that we can see, but the thermal spectrum, radio spectrum, acoustic spectrum too. Heck, we need to make sure soldiers aren't bringing their darn cell phones into the field and they post a selfie of themselves that's geolocated on Instagram. You know, if you're seen, don't be acquired or identified. That means, like, look at these two trucks. Like, which truck is more likely to be carrying cargo? The truck with the open bed or the truck with the covered bed? What's a more tempting target? The truck with the covered bed. Does that mean maybe you take all the tarps off if you're not hauling cargo? Yeah, that might mean that. Is it a pain? Yeah. Is it masking? Yeah. We might need to do that. As drone expert John Ansel said in his 7 tactical questions for corporals, who owns the sky right now? What's hiding us from their drones? How do we know the hide is working? How do we hit hard without bunching up? Who runs anti-drone and what gear do they have? How do we spot it and kill it within 2 minutes? And how long can we fight and sustain our team without resupply? And look, if you're a commander and you're fighting your battalion from the passenger seat of a Hummer, yeah, it sucks, right? I mean, you want to be in that nice warm talk with the whiteboard and a ham sandwich and your lucky coffee cup. But you might have to fight from the seat of that Humvee. Because if you put all your senior leadership in one place with radio antennas sticking out of your command post, pretty soon your junior leadership is going to be your senior leadership. Another problem mentioned was the dissemination of intelligence. Ukraine uses this battle management system called Delta, which collects real-time battlefield intelligence, uses artificial intelligence to analyze huge amounts of data, identifies targets, and coordinates strikes across commands and units. Now, this makes the Ukrainian kill chain incredibly fast. And we have software that's similar, like Mounted Mission Command, or MMCS, and Net Warrior tablets for the soldier, but we haven't really integrated in artificial intelligence. That may be fixed with the next generation command and control system, but we need this by like 2027. We got like a year left before China starts looking at Taiwan licking its lips. And, you know, a lot of the time when you're using drone feeds, the drone feed goes back to the battalion commander, it goes back to the S3, it goes back to maybe the company commander. In Ukraine, those ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance video feeds, go back to squad leaders and platoon leaders, and they can respond fast. And no matter how many drone or counter-drone systems you buy, there's always a problem with training. And this is the biggest takeaway from this entire video, is what I want you to stay to the end. The fact that training with drones is risky, because drones can fall out of the sky and land on a soldier's head. And maybe there's helicopter operations going on, we didn't properly deconflict, and a Black Hawk hits a reconnaissance drone because it doesn't know it was there. And now you have 3-4 crew members dead. You know, every commander has to do this thing called a risk assessment worksheet before they start any training exercise. And if you have drones flying overhead, I would certainly call that an occasional risk, one falling out of the sky, with catastrophic consequences if it lands on a soldier's head, meaning death or unacceptable loss. And the whole point of this risk assessment worksheet is to figure out how to take a high risk and reduce to a medium or a low risk. If you can't, what control measures do you have in place to kind of mitigate that risk? So if you want your drone to perform overwatch, let's say while your troops are trying to attack a trench line during a live fire exercise, okay, so maybe instead of flying the drone behind the soldiers or on top of the soldiers, you fly the drone ahead of the soldiers, and you kind of park it beyond their limit of advance. And then you have a range safety with the drone operator, and he coordinates with the range safeties that are advancing with the troops to make sure the troops don't go under the drone. Cool.
Stay cool, bird boy.
Now what happens if you want to set up a temporary command post and have a drone patrol the perimeter? Well, soldiers are always entering and leaving the perimeter. How do we make sure the drone doesn't fall on top of them? What do you do if you want a drone to provide overwatch while helicopters come in to pick you up? I mean, in an ideal world, you'd let the helicopter know where the drone is and how to approach, but mistakes happen. I mean, you know, pilots, sometimes the wind isn't right. The pilots decide to approach from a different direction, and then what happens if it collides with your drone? You know, this isn't really a problem for the Russians because they don't give a damn about their people, and it's not a problem for the Ukrainians because they're fighting for their lives and they're willing to take that risk in training. But how do we mitigate that risk in our training? And that is the biggest freaking problem. We have this new tool, this drone, which can be an amazing tool, but we can't really use it to its full effectiveness in training because, frankly, it's dangerous. Of course, you know, we aren't thinking about hiding our vehicles or hiding our command centers from drones because if there's too much risk to use a drone in an exercise the appropriate way, we're not going to think about that threat. So, is America prepared for the next war? At the strategic level, yeah. Odds are we will target and we will destroy every single supply vehicle for 100 miles around the breach point. And the adversary drone operators might get a couple of drones off, but they're going to do it hungry and without fuel. But are we prepared at the tactical level? Honestly, we're not.
What you just say?
We're probably about 5 years behind where we should be. We need to change the easy way now because the hard way is going to happen in 2027 or 2028 when we fight our next war. Special thanks to John Antal for proofreading my work. Any mistakes I've made in this are purely my own. You can download his documents and my documents at rhymetheft.substack.com. Grab my Intel Life hoodie from Bunker Branding. Thank you guys so much for watching.
In the modern age of progress and preparedness, one thing separates the professional from the amateur: appearance. That's why forward-thinking Americans choose Bunker Branding Apparel, the official uniform of those who get things done. Each shirt is precision engineered and field tested under rigorous conditions such as extended YouTube filming operations, Substack editorial duty, and the occasional internet argument. Designed for comfort, durability, and undeniable sense of tactical cool. So remember, citizens, when you're defending democracy, refueling freedom, or simply mowing the strategic lawn, Bunker Branding keeps you mission ready, wrinkle-free, and unmistakably American.